You talk to your dog. Maybe you try to hide it. Maybe you do it without thinking. You ask if they're hungry. You explain where you're going. You apologize when you step on their paw. And somewhere in your brain, you expect them to understand. Not the words, exactly, but something. The intent, the relationship. You do this even though you know, intellectually, that your dog doesn't speak English. Now imagine doing that for 300,000 years, but the animal isn't a dog. It's a wolf that hasn't been domesticated yet, or a mammoth that could kill you with one step, or a deer you're about to kill for food, but first you look it in the eye. Ancient humans didn't just live near animals. They lived inside the same world as animals, breathing the same air, drinking from the same rivers, reading the same sky. Animals were not background. They were neighbors, rivals, teachers, and something much stranger than any of those words. And the question of whether ancient humans tried to communicate with them isn't as simple as it sounds. The answer is yes, they did. And what they believed about that communication shaped every religion, every mythology, and every relationship between humans and the natural world for the rest of human history. Start with what ancient humans actually needed from animals. Survival, directly. The herds moved and the tribe followed. If you misread the animals, you went hungry. If you couldn't predict how the wolf pack moved, you either lost your kill or became part of theirs. If you didn't understand the behavior of the animal you were hunting, you died. This wasn't abstract interest. Understanding animals was the most practical skill a human could have. And the brain that ancient humans had, the same brain you're using right now, is extraordinarily good at reading minds. Psychologists call it theory of mind, the ability to model another being's internal state, to imagine what they're thinking, what they want, what they're about to do. Humans develop this primarily for other humans. But the brain doesn't turn it off when it looks at an animal. It applies the same system. It asks, what does this creature want? What is it afraid of? What is it planning? This is why you feel certain your cat is judging you. Your brain is running the same software it uses to read human faces and intentions. It just doesn't always calibrate correctly for a different species. Ancient hunters used this instinct at an extreme level of sophistication. Anthropologist Louis Liebenberg spent years studying the Kalahari Sand people of southern Africa, one of the few remaining cultures that practices persistence hunting, the oldest hunting method known to humans. What he documented was not just physical tracking, it was mental simulation. A skilled tracker reads footprints, broken branches, disturbed soil, and from that evidence reconstructs not just where the animal went, but why. What it was feeling, whether it was injured or rested, calm or panicked, moving toward water or away from a threat. The tracker builds a model of the animal's mind from indirect evidence, and then acts on that model as if the animal had told him directly. That's not metaphor, that's cognitive modeling. And ancient humans had been doing it for hundreds of thousands of years before anyone wrote it down. But there's a second layer. The tracking was practical. The talking was something else. Across cultures on every continent, ancient peoples developed the belief that animals could be communicated with, not just observed, but reached. That the animal had a spirit or a self that could receive and respond to human intention. The Apache hunter spoke to the deer before the kill, explaining why the death was necessary. The Siberian shaman entered a trance state to contact the spirit of the bear, seeking permission or guidance. The Aboriginal Australians maintained sacred relationships with specific animals, totems that link clans to particular species through obligation, story, and ceremony, going back tens of thousands of years. None of this was decoration. It was functional within its own framework. And the framework, while not scientifically accurate in the way we now understand animal minds, was doing something real. Evolutionary biologist Mark Bekoff spent decades documenting animal emotional lives. His work, along with researchers like Franz de Waal, established something that most ancient peoples took for granted. Animals have rich inner lives. Fear, grief, play, loyalty, recognition. Elephants mourn their dead. Wolves maintain complex social bonds. Crows hold grudges and pass the information to their offspring. Ravens solve problems. Dolphins call each other by name. The ancient instinct that animals had something going on inside was not wrong. It was directionally correct. The framework around it, spirits, permissions, sacred relationships, was the cognitive technology available at the time to handle a real and accurate observation. The animals were in there, Ancient humans were right about that. Cave art gives us the clearest window into what this relationship looked like. At Lascaux, in France, dated to roughly 17,000 years ago, the walls are covered in animals. Not humans, animals. Horses, bison, aurochs, deer, bears. Lions rendered with a skill and attention that still stops modern viewers cold. The proportions are accurate. The movement is captured. The animals look as if they're breathing. Researchers who have studied these paintings in detail note something important. The animals painted most frequently are not primarily the ones most commonly eaten. They're the ones that were most powerful, most dangerous, most impressive. The painters weren't making grocery lists. They were doing something with these images, relating to these animals in a way that went beyond hunting logistics. Neuroscientist Ian McGilchrist has written about how the ancient mind related to the natural world not as an object to be exploited, but as a presence to be engaged. The animals in cave art weren't resources. They were interlocutors, beings with whom humans had a relationship that required acknowledgement, and that relationship had rules. Almost universally, ancient hunting cultures developed elaborate protocols for the killing of animals. Apologies, gratitude, ritual handling of bones. The idea that if you killed carelessly, without proper acknowledgement, the animals would stop coming, or that you would be punished by whatever force governed the relationship between species. These weren't superstitions bolted onto practical behavior. They were the structure of the relationship itself. Anthropologist Tim Ingold argues that ancient hunter-gatherer peoples didn't experience themselves as separate from the natural world in the way modern humans do. The boundary between human and animal was permeable. Shamans took animal forms in ceremony and in belief. Ancestors returned as animals. Animals carried messages. The world was not divided into subjects, humans, and objects, everything else. It was a community of beings with different capabilities but overlapping concerns. You can see traces of this in your own instincts. The reason you talk to your dog isn't just habit. It's because the brain that evolved to read and communicate with other humans doesn't fully switch off when the other being isn't human. You extend the circle of possible communication naturally, instinctively, almost involuntarily. You speak to your plants. You apologize to inanimate objects you bump into. The brain trained for social connection keeps reaching outward. Ancient humans did this with far higher stakes and far more sophistication. The wolf they watched at the edge of the firelight wasn't a curiosity. It was something they needed to understand, predict, and, in some sense, reach. The mammoth they followed across a plain for days wasn't simply meat. It was an entity that could be read, that had intentions, that moved through the world according to its own logic. And somewhere between the tracking and the ritual, between the practical reading of footprints and the ceremony before the kill, ancient humans were doing something that is still recognizable. They were trying to close the distance between themselves and another kind of mind. They didn't have the vocabulary we have now. They didn't know about animal cognition research or mirror neurons or the evolution of social behavior. But they were paying attention in a way that modern humans rarely manage. Every day, for their entire lives, in full contact with dozens of species that mattered enormously to their survival and their understanding of the world. Tonight, if your dog looks at you in that particular way, and you find yourself explaining what you're doing and why you're not being irrational, you're doing something your ancestors did beside a fire 50,000 years ago, trying to reach something that isn't quite like you and hoping it understands.